The UK military is not adequately equipped to deal with the growing threat of a world war. That's what a top British military commander said as he called for more funding. Admiral Alan William John West, who once led Britain's Royal Navy, says that the world is more dangerous and chaotic than ever, and that major international conflicts are looming, adding that unless there is an increase in investment, Britain is staring into danger, particularly as a maritime power.
The warning about a possible European Union breakdown is nothing new, and was used as a fear tactic by pro-European Union campaigners. According to Admiral West, the UK needs to team up with the US to handle China's rising influence in the South China Sea. The Falklands War veteran raised the possibility of war in Europe in case the EU breaks apart. West's warnings fell in line with similar remarks by other senior UK commanders who are all calling for more military spending in the face of what they call threats from Russia and Britain's departure from the European Union. For the public, the question is one of security, perceived threats, and expenditure. For them, money spent on defence is only relevant when there is an enemy to defend against. And in everyday life, it is rare for the explosions of war to be close enough to Britain's shores to drown out the din of life's everyday problems.
Do the public want the UK to join the US in ever more military action? And has the world become more dangerous and chaotic? Simple questions with important answers. Now, a top British military commander has warned that the UK's military is not equipped to deal with the growing threat of a world war. Does this worry the public, and why?
Not unduly. I think really we have America to help us in these matters, and Europe. So I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Yes, it does. I think that we are seeing so many different factions now coming into the country, and if we don't have a decent military, whether they're in the country or elsewhere, we don't stand a hope in hell of actually being able to come to terms with it. It's just one of those things for the future we've got to think about. They're cutting the army, they're cutting the naval resources. We're an island, we rely on that sort of thing.
I don't think it would worry me, because I think we've got, alliances across the world anyway with America and such, and I think probably we've maybe got one of the best militaries anyway.
It would and it wouldn't, because first of all, I don't think there should be a World War III. That means it will be a World War III. Financially, that will be harder. We're in a modern world where it's very difficult to actually go to war. I mean, that's taxpayers' money. We pick up the pieces. So I don't think there should be a war.
No more worried than I was before, I don't think. I think that the military, everybody is looking for more resources and more action, or more importance for their role. So, and I think we're no more or no less worried than I was before.
It depends. I mean, without the real facts and figures to be able to look at it and kind of understand what position it would leave us in as a general public, I think there's a lot of things which happen behind closed doors that we do or don't know, and I personally wouldn't really know enough about it. I think obviously you see a lot of stuff in the media, and understanding exactly what is true and what isn't true to lead us to come to a decent conclusion as to how it would affect us.
Well, I'm not concerned about Britain's military power being weakened, but we should look at Alan West's comments and see what he means by this. Obviously, it's the age-old British propaganda trying to make out that they are not this big bad power in the world when evidence shows they are. What they've done in Iraq, what they've done in Libya, which is a forgotten conflict, what they're trying to do in Syria, and no doubt they have many other ambitions for the region. I would welcome British military power being weakened. No doubt any sane person in the world would. It's aggression across Africa, across the Middle East, in parts of Europe and in Asia. This is ongoing. It's not the days of the British Empire. This is still going. Their foreign policy is framed by their empire.
Well, I think, first of all, yes, it does worry me. I'm worried about that statement because of what it indicates is to come. As part of the military-industrial complex, when someone high-ranking in the military warns of an existential threat, I'm worried that it actually just means stepping up defence budgets for their own purposes. And that brings me on to my second thought, which is if the operative part or phrase of that question was deal with, I think that an important thing to think about is in what capacity does he mean deal with? Because currently the UK still has around 192 nuclear warheads, each weighing in at about 6 times the explosive power of Hiroshima, which, if you do the math, works out to be pretty much nuclear Armageddon anyway. So frankly, I disagree with the fact that he thinks we're not ready to deal with World War, and I think I'd question his intentions for stating that so publicly.
The commander also says that the world is more dangerous and chaotic than ever, and that more international conflicts are looming. Given Britain's aggression in Iraq, in Libya and in Afghanistan, and its support for militants in Syria, how much do the public hold the UK to blame?
Well, the UK interferes every time when there is a military problem around the world, so obviously there is no way the country will get away with it.
In what way? Why not?
Because once you have started interfering and taking actions, then the other parties in the conflict consider you all the time, and then apparently the military actions will continue.
Well, I think Tony Blair led us into a situation we should never have ever been in. But of course, we have to defend people who, can't defend themselves.
I don't know, because everybody has their own views, don't they? And I think everybody's friends, and then when you are a bunch of friends and then one doesn't play the game, you all fall out and then it all kicks off and it goes Pete Tong, doesn't it?
I do think that they do have a certain percentage of blame, in quite destabilizing the world, because the policy of regime change, which we do hear a lot from, world leaders, it hasn't really changed anything. It has actually made things worse.
I think we went in with all the right intent, but we didn't try and work out exactly what the long-term impact would be. And I think we've probably left it in a worse place now than it was.
Well, the British Empire is the biggest criminal conspiracy the world has ever seen. So the question of, is Britain to blame for these conflicts? Of course it is. It led the invasion on Libya. It led the destruction of it. It led in Iraq alongside the US. And it's trying to destroy Syria today. And they've been trying to do that since the 50s, after they got freedom from France. So the British, there is usually their hand wherever in the world, from Kashmir to Palestine. They laid the foundations for the ethnic cleansing in 1948. In Ireland, they created the colonial settler state. The issues in South Africa, all of this has a British colonial legacy. And the foreign policy of Britain is framed by that.
Well, I think that the UK is plenty to blame, primarily because of its colonial mindset. The colonialism that was spread historically is the same as the neo-colonialism spread now, save for a few differences. The old colonialism that spread violence through the practice of divide and rule used English soldiers, whereas neo-colonialism and the exploitation of the financial exploitation of countries is done via proxy and proxy agent, as it were, and it can be seen in Syria through, in terms of English foreign interests, Assad represents something, an obstacle to British foreign interests, and anything except for Assad at this point presents a viable alternative, even if it does mean chaos, as we can see what happened in Libya to Gaddafi and the way that Libya is now.
The Admiral also says that if the European Union breaks up and things go badly wrong in Europe, then Britain will have to sort it out just like it did in 2 world wars. Do the public believe him, or is this just military propaganda?
I think we were fine before we were in the EU. We had ways of dealing with things, and we'll find them again. Whether they're ways we're used to seeing, who knows? But whether we're in the EU or not, if there is some sort of war situation, being in the EU or not being in it is actually not going to make that much difference. We've got our own armed forces, we've got allies we can rely on. So I would hope that we would have help there.
That could be propaganda. It's difficult to foresee, but I don't think it's that bad, no.
Well, it could be military propaganda, but I just wish we would stay in stay in the European Union because I'm very much pro the European Union. So it's a shame it even has to come to that, really. But hopefully it might not, because we might all change. But yes, I can see that thought could be put forward, how we were in the last two wars on our own in these things. Yeah, I understand that. And that does worry me, yeah, that certainly would.
I think that's right at all. No, I can't see all the other guys in Europe going, oh no, you're on your own. And likewise, if they get in trouble, I mean, you know, we went to Afghan and Iraq and things like that, maybe right or wrong reasons, but why wouldn't we go help Spain or France or Germany?
I think that's overstating the case. I hope.
Why do you think it's overstating the case?
I think we've all learnt, the governments or everybody, people generally have learnt that going to war is not a constructive option, and I very much hope that's the case. No, we all travel more widely. We see other people's points of view, and on the whole, with some radical exceptions, that on the vast majority of people are happy with the status quo.
Well, British propaganda, while we're on that topic, makes out that the British won their war all by themselves and the Soviets just showed up. As for heightened tensions in Europe, no doubt British imperialism is for British interest. So they're going to be competing against France. They've been competing against them for a very long time. It'll go back to the days of that. Indeed, Libya was a joint project between the two nations. With Brexit, what we'll see, who knows? Imperialism acts funny when it's under threat. So it acts more irrationally, and I personally think that British imperialism will be strengthened from leaving the EU. I have no doubt about that, and that it will need to start looting its economic empire, which is the Commonwealth.
Well, from a factual perspective, if the EU does break up, it does bring in the possibility of World War. The EU was made to create unity between Germany and France after the Second World War, I believe. So it breaking up would signal the potential for conflicts between European and white Western countries. However, I think that this is also a case of the worst kind of military propaganda. And I think that the Admiral suffers from a white saviour colonial mentality in that Great Britain didn't just come into the World War and sort things out. It contributed, and its contributions should be acknowledged and recognised. But at the same time, Russia and the USSR contributed, in terms of sacrifice of its own population, between 2 and 8 times more. And I think it's widely acknowledged that Russia actually made the biggest push in at least the Second World, or the USSR made the biggest push in the Second World War to defeat the Nazis. So the Admiral's opinion that Britain sorted things out is entirely a falsehood.
The UK Ministry of Defence has defended Britain's combat readiness, promising a massive £178 billion to renew the country's already powerful war machine, which is currently engaged in several military conflicts overseas. Yet it is a fact that what has been labelled the politics of fear proved ineffective when on June the 23rd, 2016, a majority of British electors voted to leave the European Union.
Admiral John West also says the UK should team up with the US to handle China's rising influence in the South China Sea. Should Britain team up with the US in military aggression or stay well clear? We put that to the public.
Should never ever again go with the Americans, because their policies, they're not thought through properly. I mean, and especially if Donald Trump gets into power, I think it could just lead us into so much conflict that we can't handle and we cannot afford.
It depends what you're joining up with them with. You know, there's obviously a lot
of military action.
Military action, yeah. I think we have definitely got a different way of doing things, and I think quite often the UK is quick to move to the States with their kind of militant ideas, and the fact that they are the correct way to work with it with sort of militant force. I personally don't think it's probably the best idea. I think, as I said, once some people start owning up to things and dealing with them in their own ways rather than trying to look to other people, that's when we start to actually get some decent action out of it.
Well, I don't know. Fighting doesn't always solve everything, does it?
Would we be in danger if we got involved there?
Well, as long as my family's all right and you're all right, my friend, I don't really give a monkeys.
We should stay clear of that.
Why is that?
I think it's about time Britain, makes its own mind, when it comes to foreign policy, not just following, what any other country, because everybody has their own interests. So Britain should always do things based on their own interests, not really what America wants, because the Iraq issue, we haven't still come out of it up till now.
First try negotiations, and if you're going to go into it, think about it end to end and learn from our mistakes and see if we can sustain it and we can see it all the way through. It's no point going in there, rattling a cage, making things worse and then abandoning it. And we need to pick our fights, and China is not a Iraq or a Afghanistan or a Syria where you can come and sort of prod them and walk away. They'll retaliate, and we need to be prepared for that.
It's not really a case of what I want. I don't have any stake in the British state as regards to that. But I will say that Britain and the US, they have a great partnership, and it's not this one that they try and make out where Britain is the lapdog. Britain works in British interests, there's no doubt about that, as we've seen, and there's much to suggest that is the case. I think their ongoing aggression against China is because they do not want any country to emerge. Britain needs to protect its economy, which is reliant on imperialism. That is how this country operates. The economy is founded on that basis. What do they have in Britain? They don't have anything. All they have is what they've looted from other countries, and they need to continue looting. China is emerging, India is emerging, Brazil is emerging. These countries will come under increasing threat from this country and the United States, but we should never forget the hand this country has, the legacy it has. It's at the forefront of the asset stripping in Africa. So there is no doubt it will up the ante in attacking China and attacking India and all those emerging powers in the region, because it needs to protect its stake, and it will never give it up without a fight. And we have to remember, the British are the masters at this. They taught the Americans, so we should always watch what the British hand is doing.
I could come at this from so many angles for the opinion that Britain should stay out of it. I believe that Britain should stay out of it because I believe that the US, Britain, France, all white European and American countries should, as a matter of principle, stay out of other foreign sovereign countries and let the people of those countries decide what happens. Further to that, that also means their respective South China Sea, it's not part of US waters, so stay out of it. But I also think that an important point to note is that not just from an anti-imperialist perspective, but just from a kind of national welfare perspective, it doesn't make sense, because the UK is so reliant on China for trade. In certain ways anyway, it can be seen to be financially dependent on trade from China. And also, just on the basis of military might, it doesn't really make sense to start wars with China just because they have such a big army.
Why has Britain always had such an appetite for military aggression and war? That's what we put to the public.
Because they started it years ago, colonizing the world. So it's inbred.
It's a big profit over there. There are a lot of money, so this is my personal opinion. I think it's the only reason today's they create war, because of the profit, because of the money.
Well, I think it could have started in recent times with Margaret Thatcher over the Falklands War, and then I think Blair wanted to take that with Bush on the Iraq matter. But I don't think that worked at all.
I think we've always been a fighting country, always looked after ourselves, always stuck up for ourselves, always helped out other countries. So I just think it's in our blood, really. Not to say that's the right thing, but yeah.
Well, I'm not quite sure if their aggression is that way inclined. I think just we get dragged into things that we shouldn't ever get dragged into. But unfortunately, we are doing, aren't we? We're getting we're getting pulled into situations that we should never be involved in.
I think the government have wanted to sort of make a point, certainly under Blair, he sort of wanted to be tough and be friends with the US, and the US at that stage were arguably warmongering, and I think we've all learnt the lesson that that was a big mistake.
Well, the British have been involved in more than 130 conflicts, and that's just the British Army. We don't know about the covert ones. That's since the end of World War II. 130 different conflicts. The British are so aggressive militarily. The reason for that is because their economy is reliant on imperialism. It always has been reliant on imperialism, and it will continue to be reliant on imperialism. They don't have anything here. All they can do is loot. Their country was built on loot, and arguably their imperialism has sophisticated itself since the days of the 50s when they overthrew Mossadegh to get the oil in Iran. And we can give many examples. They built their NHS off the back of looting Malaya and murdering and cutting the heads off of anybody who dare resist. Indeed, they were the first head choppers that were publicised. So we must remember that the British are so aggressive because their country is reliant on imperialism, and that's a very fundamental point to all this. The economy couldn't operate without this, so they're going to get more aggressive. Indeed, their economy is getting worse, so they're going to get more aggressive. The people, the rest of the world, are going to face this onslaught by the British state.
Well, I think that that Britain has had this appetite for war and military aggression from going all the way back to the time that it was its former colonial power, and as such, it's built into the definition of Great Britain, the country that had an empire so large that the sun never set on it. And it can be seen in the old forms of imperialism through the practice of divide and rule, which used violence in many cases, both physical, emotional, economic, to basically lay claim to foreign lands and their resources, and uses economic violence and capitalism now to do the same thing. As I mentioned before, it won't fight with its own people, it'll fight by proxy. So everything's become a little bit more subtle, but it's essentially the same aggression and the same points of view that have endured. And I think case in point is the fact that the native industries here in England that are failing, namely mining and steel, don't involve much of this military aggression. But if you look at the weapons manufacturers, other people who profit from conflict zones, they're all doing very well. So I think if you can just see the fact that in this economic downturn, the industry that's doing the best is the one that's making the weapons and the bombs, then you can start to understand why the UK has such an enormous aggression around the world.
Despite calls for more investment in military force, the public shows little interest in such expenditure. Some may be worried about the future security of the country, but few express any sense of urgency about rearming Britain, and they're not alone in feeling this way.
Senior military experts clearly believe Britain's current appetite for military aggression and war inevitably lead to chaos and destruction, a view shared by a top military commander who says Britain is not even ready for the very wars it wages. Is this a dramatic example of Britain's foolishness or its appetite for conflict? Perhaps it's an example of both.